research, because every word has to be really dead on right. So once I spent all day doing that, I don't particularly like that, sitting down and pulling out a bunch of reference books and researching a novel. I want to think this is the same thing. So part of doing the fantasy novels would be this escape for me. It's just, I can just plunge myself into an entire world I'm making up out of whole cloth.
Of course, it gives your readers so much opportunity for their imagination to be stimulated and move in many directions with what you give them.
One can only hope so.
Well, I know in reading the Brown one, it certainly set me off in many directions. It was a lot of fun to meet these unusual characters with great abilities to accomplish unexpected and unimagined
I just make them,
tasks.
up as I go along.
Well, it's a lot of fun.
There was one that did take some research, though, and I don't think you've seen. I think there's a copy at the library. I think called Bradamant, which was based on a character from a 15th century Italian epic poem called Orlando Furioso. And I read this. It's a 1,000-page poem, and there's one character in it that I thought deserved her own book. She was a knight in the service of Charlemagne. I thought, cool. So I picked out the thread of her adventures to the book, which is interweaved to everything. I realized it was like an outline of a novel. So I took it that way. I wrote a whole book based on her. But it takes place in a real time and place, even though it's really a fantasy novel. So it's an historical fantasy, which is a whole
whole category.
Whole other genre.
Well, you move in many, many directions. There's no doubt about that. As a matter of fact, I was very interested in how many different areas you touch. Not only touch, but you create.
They're not as different as you would think.
Well, magazines and comic books and
those
posters and movies and television.
Those are venues. The subjects are pretty narrow.
But it gives you an opportunity to get this kind of information out to practically everybody. I mean, from kids to adults, from people who read a lot to people who only occasionally pick up a book, to people who are interested in science, to people who just like to read for fun. It just is amazing. Well,
that's the main thing. Is the most important thing are the science books, because their intention is to get people excited about, especially about astronomy, which is my specialty.
Yes.
Who normally wouldn't give it half a thought. A book I did actually 20 years ago, which is being reissued this winter, in a whole brand new edition done from scratch. It's called The Grand Tour, and it's specifically designed for people who have no pre-knowledge at all about the solar system, but are still educated. I mean, it's like most books about this were either for kids, so they're kind of primer-like, or they're for adults who are assumed to have some pre-knowledge about astronomy, so they just leap right into stuff, and they talk about the chemistry of the planets and lots of numbers and things. They assume you already know something, but there's a big gap in the middle. You have the educated adult who has no pre-knowledge about the planets.
Yeah.
So the book's written for this market. It's the first two editions did really, really well. 250,000 copies or something like this.
That's wonderful.
So to bring it up to date, because a lot's happened in the last decade since the last edition, we're just doing the book over again, essentially. All new pictures and text and everything. But once again, it's still for the same people. For example, when we talk about big numbers, we just throw a huge 10 trillion light year thing at them or something. You try to put numbers in context by saying something is so many times further away than the sun or things, to make ideas more accessible and not burden the reader with a lot of heavy science. And it seems to have worked.
Well, I'm sitting here with 3 volumes that you just showed me of science books, astronomy, and
yeah, these are for teenagers.
This is for teenagers, but there's a lot of information in here that all of us who know nothing
I don't write
about
down to the kids. Well, I don't write down to the kids so you can read it easily.
I think that's probably an important aspect. And this is, how many are there in this series?
There's 10, with an 11th one coming out this late winter, early spring.
And they deal with all of the planets.
All the planets, including the sun, asteroids, meteors, and comets. You know, everything whirling around our sun is in these things.
Ron, let me ask you about some of the other venues. Films, for instance.
Okay.
I guess probably the best known in this area, because I think there were some articles and there's information on it in your bio that appears on the library website and so forth. Dune.
Yes.
That visiting the Dune site on the internet was very interesting because it gave a very interesting view of what you actually had to do in order to make the film come to life. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
In how much detail would you like to hear this? I only got the job because I was sitting in my studio, really wondering where my next cheeseburger was coming from. I got this phone call from the production company, and they said they'd seen my book, The Grand Tour. The first edition had just come out. And they thought that my paintings of Mars looked like Dune, the planet. And they wanted to know if I would like to come out and work on the movie with them. And I said, let me think about that for a second. Yeah. And they said, well, come on out and see if you like us, we like you. And it turned out I was there for an entire year and ended up in Mexico for 9 months. And my primary job was taking the script and the production designer's sketches and coming up with these large paintings showing what the finished scene would actually look like in the movie. The paintings were done long and narrow, like a cinemascope frame even. And I eventually graduated from that, doing that in addition to doing a small-scale production design. I designed the weapons in the movie and lots of little tabletop things, little stuff, and all the graphics, the various symbols and little alphabets in the movie I did too. And my wife worked on it as well as a model maker.
I noticed the models are shown on that website, and they really look quite complex.
She came out to visit me when I was in Los Angeles working, and to pass an afternoon, she sat down and made a little paper model of one of the spacecraft. And Raffaello De Laurentiis, the producer, came in, and she looked at it and says, "Where'd that come from?" And she said, "Well, I just made this." And she said, "Would you like to have a job?" So she spent the rest of the year working on the movie as well.
That's wonderful. Does she often work with you, or are there?
That's, only one other time. We worked on an early version of Total Recall, and she did the same thing. She made these preliminary models, and we did that in Italy.
What is her background?
She has a degree in ceramics and sculpture, and she would dearly love to do models for movies for real.
Yes, I'm sure.
All the time. But
I'm sure that would be great fun.
She's the craftsman of the family. I can't build things to save my life, so she takes care of all the construction and building and sculpturing and picture framing, and I just take care of the flat stuff.
Well, the flat stuff is pretty impressive too.
Thanks.
Rob, what about television? I know you've done some work on that. There was something about A&E biography.
I've just done what you're doing. I sit and be interviewed.
So
I haven't done
you haven't actually contributed to television programs in any way.
No.
I'm surprised.
So I've done dozens of interviews on different subjects. Jules Verne and history of rockets and history of space travel and space art and I can't even think what all. Whatever I can pontificate on convincingly, people will come in and talk to me about.
And the comic books, was that something that you...
Once again, I've actually never really done a comic book.
You haven't done a comic book?
No.
Well, you're working on a comic book now,
well,
sort of virtual comic book, or...
Well, I did.
Well, maybe not virtual, but...
I did a comic book as a kind of little downloadable premium for the people who are interested in my my detective, in a detective novel I wrote. So, but it's just a little 10-page thing. It's not even a real full-size comic book. It's just for fun. But I have a big ambition to do a comic book, a full real one, in print.